After e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, we're playing the Rossolimo against the classical Sicilian. In this video, we're going to go through stuff we haven't seen about the e6 variation. Now, as we know, we have to take the knight. We've never seen d takes bishop. We're going to see it in this video. However, let's start with pawn takes the b pawn, and the b pawn takes the bishop, and then e5. Now, in the past, we went through moves like d5, and also we've seen a lot of it. But we're gonna look at two moves we haven't seen. One of them is f6 immediately. Black doesn't want to play d5, obviously, because as we know, we take en passant, we create this weakness. And also doesn't want to play d6 for the same reason. So black says, you know what, I'll give you the f pawn, and I can keep my 4 pawns in the center as soon as I'm done trading with this one, which is fair enough. Before we look at that, let's complete a line we've seen in the past. Knight e7, as we know, we have to play d3. And after knight to g6, bishop to d2, bishop to e7, only way to develop, and now h4. In the past, we noticed how this is actually not a free pawn. There are 3 black attackers and 2 white defenders, but this is not a free pawn. That pawn is absolutely poisoned. And we also went through h5 by black. So black can't even refuse that h5 is a bad move. What if black plays... Well, obviously h6, we're not going to look at this because simply h5, and this knight will be forced to f8. It's a ridiculous position. Now let's look at f6. So that's the motif of the day. After f6, you take. And when the bishop takes back, h5. h5 was going to happen anyway. 2 moves here we're going to look at, and then we're going to close this line. One of them would be the knight removing itself from that square. The other one is bishop taking the pawn in b2. This is interesting because this is trapping the rook. However, we don't care because we're going to take the knight. And now, funny enough, after obviously losing the rook, funny enough now, we play knight to c3. We're down the exchange, and yes, we have just trapped our opponent bishop, but the bishop can go to b2. However, we do have moves like rook h7, rook takes, pawn takes, but this is a disaster. That will be a passed pawn on the 7th rank. It can easily be defended. Let's say knight g5, queen h5, easily defending that pawn. And it's game over. So what if black just takes the piece and says, you know what, let me go up in advantage, material advantage a lot. Well, fine, take back. As if nothing had happened. Pawn can't take back because rook takes rook and wins the game. There's nothing else to do here. Inevitably, we are going to go to h7. And h6 doesn't work. Because simply this pawn falls and so does this one. And if black castles here, a bit crazy, but still, rook takes. We're down in material. However, you got an attack on g7, and it's just deadly, as you can tell. So back in this position, when we were attacking the knight, what if instead of bishop to b2, black just saves the knight? Let's say knight e5. Fine, take, and now h6. Once again, this pawn trapping the rook just doesn't work because you can just take. You take back. You've also got a threat of queen h5, so this is not going to work. g6 kind of stops everything. Okay, now we have to play bishop c3, and now we're forcing a trade because otherwise we win the rook, and that's it. This is it's a much better position for white, and also our opponent is indeed losing the bishop pair, so it's not like black will retain a good center in the bishop pair. The bishop pair is gone. And yes, black has a few pawns in the center, but the king has got absolutely nowhere safe the castle. If queen to f6, putting more pressure, still you play knight to d2, careless. Because bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes, loses a pawn. However, castle, and after castle, simply rook to b1. And now this bishop can't develop. I mean, it can develop to a6, but it's useless. What about d5? To stop jumps in e4. Fine, knight f3. And this is a completely winning position for the white player because the black bishop is really bad. It's impossible to stop white from playing moves like knight to g5, rook e1, finalizing the pressure on this pawn. A move like c4, trying to undermine our pawns in the center. You just play d4. Position evaluated as if white was up a piece. This is not a small advantage or anything. And you're going to take it from here. This pawn in the center is going to help the knight as well and prevent the pawn from going down. c5 to challenge the center doesn't work because you're just going to take the pawn. as a pass pawn. Yes, these pawns can look scary, but they're going nowhere. And in this position, instead of c5, even in, let's say, this sacrifice, by the way, doesn't work. Right? Take, and now queen takes in d4. It looks scary because there's so many pawns in the center. But here you just capitalize with queen a3, and you're going to e7. It's impossible to stop that. Queen f4 to be able to get back in control of the king side, and also to attack this pawn. You just play queen e7. You give up this pawn, and now material is like kind of equal, but check, and you're gonna take this pawn. So let's say queen protects, but then you take this pawn. It's completely over, as you can tell. So from the start, we're gonna look at the once again, but I mean different line this time. So e6, as we know, we take, and now e5. What if f6 right away? This is one of the main moves, and it's a very important move to know what to do now. d3. Obviously, don't take this pawn. You're helping. I mean, don't take this one because then you're helping your opponent develop. d3 has to happen, and after pawn takes, knight takes back. Now we have a threat of immediately playing queen h5, winning the game on the spot. So obviously, black will have to play knight f6. And now the key move to remember is knight to g4. So we do want to take, so that allows us queen h5 with some annoying threats against the black king. Nothing special, to be honest, but let's look at two potential moves here. One of them, we're going to look at d5, and the other one, knight takes knight. If d5, then bishop f4, develop. Two moves from this position. One of them, bishop d6. This is bad because you can just take the knight, and now queen cannot take with the smooth development because then black loses the bishop. It's check, so black has to take. But now this allows us to play check, king moves, take, and again, position is not winning for white. As in, I mean, of course it's better for white here. It's like +1 something, but the black king isn't really unsafe. It's less safe than the white king, so white can start attack and make threats easier, so because you can infiltrate with the queen and so on. And this black bishop is stupid. So this is what we get when black plays the absolute best moves. You're still going on a better position. Let's see how to take the games from here with some sample moves. Knight to d2 now developing. Bishop d7 developing, maybe playing bishop e8, but now you castle long. Bishop e8 wouldn't be good. You've got ideas like queen e6 with a threat of queen g7, and the rooks are disconnected. So you want to play, let's say for instance, rook a to b8, putting the rook on this file. Okay, queen h6, and after king f7. These are all best moves, stopping any infiltration of the queen. f4 by white. Queen f8, looking for trade, and then going on the endgame with really strong center. Queen h5, deny the trade. King moves. Knight to b3, threatening this pawn. It's very important. King to d8, allowing the queen to protect that pawn. Queen to h4, puts pressure on f6. The threat of the white player is to simply play queen f2 and then go and take this pawn. As simple as that. d4 will be a weakening move forever because he will give us these two squares available for the knight to jump to. So let's close the line by showing here after this move. What about king c8, for instance? Right, just to make a move to show you what the plan is. So queen f2, and that's it. d4, king to b1 is the best move. And whatever the black player does, queen d6, for example, knight d2, you're jumping to these two squares. Position now evaluated as if white was up a piece almost. So let's go back here. Once again, the line with f6, right? So e6, take, e5, f6 straight away, d3. Okay, take. Knight f6 is mandatory for black at this point. Knight g4. We're looking at the variation with d5. Okay, bishop f4. Instead of bishop d6, which is it's a loose piece, what about bishop e7, normal development? Okay, return to e5. So if black doesn't take you, and he plays bishop e7, return to e5, because now you're making a threat on this famous weakness in c6. And you want to go there and then swap with the bishop and you're winning. It's an easy endgame. Queen to b6 now. Developing the queen, defending the pawn, putting pressure on b2, attacking the rook. It's just a very easy move to come up with. Knight d2. This pawn taking here is pointless, and I'll show you why in a second. Castle by black. Bishop g3. Knight d7, challenging a very strong knight. How to take that? Leave it. Castle. We don't care. If there's too much pressure on that knight, then you just add the defender. Knight d to f3. And if take, you take back. We are happy to trade everything into an endgame. Take. It looks like we're going to go down a pawn. Queen to b6 now is taking that pawn. But that's not a problem because you just play rook to e1. Preparing to put pressure on this weak pawn. Okay, rook to b8. Rook to b1. Trade everything. Okay, take. Why are we trading if we are losing in material? Well, we've got an attack on a weak pawn and this pawn is weak forever, remember. The computer is completely confident here in trading everything, in allowing the trades. And there's nothing that can be done to stop us from taking that pawn. The knight will be jumping, the rook's on an open file. White's position is completely winning here. So in this position, we know the key move was knight to g4. We went through d5. We saw some ideas about d5. What about the knight taking us? Okay, obviously take back. And now a move like d5 with the idea of potentially e5, they're taking a lot of space in the center. You just play queen g3. Because bishop d6 cannot be played since you're attacking the g7 square. So you don't have to worry. Queen to d6, looking for trade. You just play bishop f4. So that doesn't work. The queen returned to e7, you just castle. And let's not look at this line. It's just white is so much better in this position. This bishop cannot develop at all. The black king will have nowhere safe to castle unless he wants to try to develop from the fianchetto. But bishop e5 will be a monster. And so let's not do that. Instead of queen e7, what if the queen goes back to d8? From where she will be able to access other squares. Okay, knight d2. Queen to b6. Castle. And again, we don't care about this pawn. Let that be the motif of the day. Rook a to b1. We don't care about neither this one or this one. That's crazy. Let's say queen c2. Putting pressure on the knight and the pawn. Unable to take them, but just capturing stuff. The point is that we're going to play this move. Rook f to c1. Queen has to go back to a4. Knight to f3. Completely careless, we just gave up 2 pawns because this structure, remember this from this video, this structure is not good. And once you have a knight in f3 and the bishop in f4 protecting this square, that square is yours forever, it can never push. The development of this bishop is impossible and the development from this side is pointless. And this bishop can never even move because your queen g3 is so well placed. So remember these motifs. Let's make an example. Bishop e6 that does not seem like a bad move because it puts pressure on this pawn and it looks like this is a fine diagonal. Eventually maybe even idea like c4. Okay, you play rook e1, attacking that square, and obviously a move like the king moving is not going to be seen because the knight is jumping with check. That's ridiculous. King e7 is stupid as one can possibly be. So bishop will have to go back to c8, but now knight to g5, finalizing the pressure on that square. It's completely horrible position for black. So back in this position after the queen takes, what if instead of d5, black plays queen f6, developing, trying to finally be able to castle. Okay, castle. d5 now. Now the queen, remember, is protecting g7. That's the point of queen f6 also. Queen g3 once again, preventing bishop d6. Okay, bishop e7. Our opponent is going to be able to castle at least. Let's just look at one line from this position. Knight e2. Castle. Knight f3. Again, this bishop can never play unless he goes to a6. Fine. Bishop g5 attacks the queen. Queen will have to move and save the bishop from the attack. Rook f to e1. Obviously, bishop takes is stupid because when you take, then you go double attack on this pawn and the attack on the queen, so it's losing. What about rook a to b8? I don't know, developing, putting an attack on this pawn. b3. Simple as that. c3 by black doesn't work. And c4 couldn't really happen before. So let's say in this position, for example, a move like c4 now instead of rook b8, it looks like it's possible because it puts a lot of attack on this pawn. But you will just take the bishop, and then when the queen takes back, then take the pawn, and obviously taking back, and then knight d4 finalizes the pressure on this pawn and this pawn as well. You are inevitably going to win material, and that's an amazing position. So in this position here, we, instead of c4, what if rook b8? Okay, b3. Now even if black plays c4 with the idea of disrupting our pawns, you just take, and now again take, knight d4, same stuff. From the start, we're gonna look now at the variation with d takes in c6. We haven't seen that at all. So e6 we take. What if black takes with this pawn? Now we go on with d3. So a few options now. Let's see, knight f6, bishop d6, and bishop e7, right? All the normal moves. So if knight f6, you play knight d2, and after bishop e7, the moves here are often interchangeable. Anyway, b3 now, that's the way to go. Castle, and now bishop b2. We're not going to look at a move like b5 here, because it doesn't do anything, right? You're going to play a4 now, and that's it. Black cannot really take, because then this would be a double isolated pawn. That's stupid. White's plan now is to just play queen e2 and carry on. Black defending maybe like this, you're still going to play queen e2. There's all you need to do when black plays the early b5, like here, right, is pawn a4, and then do nothing. Whenever they take you, you take back with the rook, got a rook and open file. If they don't take you, then that just stays there forever. So it's a completely pointless move. So let's not look at that. Let's look at two options here. One of them is queen to c7, developing. Okay, queen e2. Rook e8, this is a close game. I mean, nothing's really happening soon. e5 comes now. And now the knight is going to be removed from that square. Knight to d5, c4. Crazy enough, I always struggle to actually decide to play this move because it seems so bad to me. Because this pawn now is going to be weak forever, especially after the knight goes back to, let's say, b4. Well, now the knight's threatening knight c2, obviously, so we have to play knight e4. But then, what about rook d8? Finishing the pressure on the square d3, and now it looks like knight will want to go there, but you just play rook to d1. And then you can kick the knight away, and this knight will have nowhere to go except a6, from where it will be completely dead. What about knight takes in a2? In a2, yes, you play h4. Position is evaluated +3. It's not just, random moves or anything. It's just black can't really make a move. The plan here for us is to simply play knight fg5, right, like this, and then go queen h5 and then checkmate. As simple as that. You don't even have to worry about h6, because you can literally give this knight away, because after you take back, you got the queen and the rook supporting each other. That's how stronger the white position is. If black plays h6 right now, to stop it in knight g5 idea, you just play rook h3. Who needs the castle in a close game? The idea here for white is simply to play rook to g3, and then knight f6 check, then able to go to h5 and finalize the pressure over the king side. Now in this position, after the move c4, what if instead of knight b4, which leads nowhere, what if knight f4, which is the best move, comes with an attack on the queen. Okay, queen e4. Okay, knight has to go back to g5. There was nothing else to do. h4. And now the threat of h6, h5, the knight will have to move. It's gonna have to go back. That's ridiculous. h6 by black. You play g4. And that's it. You're going to play g5. You're going to trade with those pawns no matter what. And f6 is never possible because the knight falls. So we're going to drop the line there. So back in this position, we play d3. And we're still looking at the variation with knight f6. Okay, knight d2. And now bishop e7. b3. Castle. Very normal, very boring. However, bishop b2, white is just better. One move we haven't seen now, which is a5. Just an attack, just an expansion on the queen side, especially because the black king's side is weak. a4 by white, stop that from happening. b6, the bishop is now free to go into better squares. Okay, queen e2, bishop a6, knight e5, the usual move, attacking the weakness in c6, a weakness that we create at move 4. Queen to c7, castle. We don't have to worry about the knight, it's protected by the bishop. Knight to d7, challenging our amazing knight. Fine, take it. Pawn, queen takes back, and now e5 comes. And we have given this amazing square for our knight to go in the future. What about this move now? f5. Okay, fine, take. Bishop takes back, and now bishop to e5. This shouldn't really be taken because the endgame is just completely winning for white because the e6 pawn is weak forever. Rook a to d8. Okay, rook f to e1, putting pressure on that weak pawn. Rook f to e8. Queen e4. Queen d5, trying to trade and reduce the weakness, obviously, because of the bad pawn structure. Bishop takes in f6. And that's it. When they take back, queen f4 is the best move. Threatening this pawn. That's it. There's no coming back already. Position is completely winning for white. One last thing. If queen here desperate for trade, just do it. But now knight e4. Threatening this, threatening that. These are obviously just samples of how the games could go. But like you're supposed now to know the ideas behind them. And you know the patterns. That's what you need to get. Never try to memorize moves. Just learn the patterns. So back in this position, after d3, we saw knight f6. We didn't see any bishop move. Now bishop e7, for instance. You can just, it's a transposition. Because then, if you play knight d2 and then knight f6 and then b3, it's exactly the same position. So back here, instead of bishop e7 and the development of the knight, let's look at bishop d6. This is a different move, creates a different setup. Okay, here you attack this immediately. And when the bishop moves away, queen e2. Now the knight will have to develop. f6 is not accessible. Knight e7 is the move, and also the knight will have these two squares, very desirable squares, to go to knight c3. And when the knight goes to d5, for instance, bishop d2. Develop. Castle, obviously black is not interested in taking us, that would be stupid. And now you play h4. Straight away, don't even think about it. Okay, now a move like bishop to a5 here, to put more attack on that square. Just an example. You just play h5, right? This is what you're trying to play, h5. Let's make an example now. Knight takes, take back with the pawn. h6, stopping the arrival of our pawn, g4. We're going to play g5. That's why we didn't trade the bishop. Remember the patterns. We had no interest in trading our bishop because the square g5 would have been weaker, although g5 could have still been a thing. Anyway, c4 by black, trying to undermine the control of the center. Black doesn't really have any move. Look how cramped these pieces are. They're really stupid. g5, we don't care. If they take, fine, take back. We're not going to trade queens, of course. And then once we open this file here for the rooks to go, we're going to be on easy street. One last mention before closing this video. Here we went through this example move, bishop a5. But like, what if f6, challenging, let's call it the motif of the day, challenging this strong center, and the black queen will be able to access lovely squares. Rooks will be in an open file. You just carry on h5. And now, so we just played h5. We're going to look at pawn takes pawn. But what if, let's say, black plays h6 and says, you know what, I just stop pushing that pawn. Okay, fine. Castle long. And after pawn takes, you just recapture. Take, right? Just an example. We're going to be putting pressure on this pawn forever. But you can say it's well defended. The knight was a monster in e5. That's why I thought we should look at the variation where the bishop takes, in e5, because that knight there was a god. Queen to f6, threatening to swap, threatening to take this pawn, and go to a quieter end game. Crazy enough, you take, and now knight e4 attacks the rook. The rook will have to move. g4. With the idea of smashing this king side, right? We're just gonna push the pawns. b6 to allow development of the bishop. That bishop can't possibly move. g5, that's an example. e5. You just take this pawn and you carry on. What if instead of e5, here, after g5, the pawn takes. Rook d to g1. We're gonna take that pawn. Rook f5 to defend that pawn. This is impossible. It cannot be defended. You're going to play h6 anyway. You carry on from this completely winning position. Last mention here in this position after h5 instead of h6. What if black just takes the pawn? Okay. Bishop g5 attacks the queen. Queen e8. h6 is coming anyway. We're going to open the files. If g6 to keep it closed, fine. Knight e4. Knight f4 by black. Looks like a very good move. Attacks the queen. Threatens this pawn. Okay, fine. Queen to f1. We're going to play a bit defensive at this point. But you can play g3 later and the knight will be kicked away. If instead, I don't know, bishop a5 check. Okay, fine. Block it with the pawn. Bishop d8. Threatening to swap with our very strong bishop. And simply g3. This knight cannot get saved because then he will take this bishop and then he will win this pawn in e5. Position evaluated as if we were almost up a piece. Even though after g3 here, even if black were to take our bishop first, you will take with this knight so that this knight can still attack that pawn. And when this knight moves, you can finish the attack on e5.